of Samson Bonham, very known as the master politician and was an outstanding statesman too. He was a great leader and our hero, you understand. That's why we remember Edmund Bonham.
Hey, morning to you viewers. I'm here with you today once again, the fourth Sunday of the month of July. We have another program, The State of the Nation. And of course, you know this program comes to you under the auspices of the Forbes Bonham Foundation. And this is a program that we have every fourth Sunday. And today, Forbes Bonham, you know, has been an advocate, strong advocate for that matter, of education, public education, not only in Guyana, but in the Caribbean and wider field. And one of the topics in the air right now is that of election and closer home house-to-house registration, which has started on the 20th of July. And of course, you know, there is need for clarity on several fronts in the interest of credible and free and fair elections. Now, a date has not been set, but fortunately, only recently we have had appointed a chairperson for the Guyana Election Commission to kind of facilitate the continued work of the body. So, on the question of public education, I have with me in the studio today Mr. Vincent Alexander, one of the commissioners, and we will be examining this question of one, why house registration at this time, and secondly, what would house kind of registration do to kind of facilitate this upcoming regional and national elections?
Thank you very much, Clayton. Good morning to the viewers out there. Indeed, this question of registration is a very, very crucial question at this time. It is at the center of all that's happening, and one would assume that with the appointment of a chairperson of GCOM, that great attention is going to be paid to this issue. As people should know, registration has commenced, is ongoing, but there are those who are still critical to the extent that there are reported acts of attempting to sabotage the registration process. For example, there are people who are going about telling the workers that the process is illegal and they would not be paid, and trying in that regard to get the workers to abandon the exercise. So that really there is tremendous need for an understanding of the role registration plays in our electoral process. And so, Clayton, first of all, I want to make the point that registration itself is a civic responsibility that attracts a penalty if one does not get registered. Of course, we have not been practicing imposing any penalty. One would prefer that the civic responsibility is upheld. What registration does is to allow for every Guyanese over the age of 14 to be registered and to be entered into something which is called the National Register of Registrants. Now, in addition to every Guyanese who can prove that by virtue of a Guyanese birth certificate or a passport, there are other people, particularly in this instance, citizens of the Commonwealth, who at the time of registration would have spent over a year resident in Guyana to also be registered. So in addition to citizenship and that Commonwealth status, the other thing that the law specifies is residency. And the person must be resident in Guyana to be registered. And I think we need to make a clear note of the fact that there are two factors involved here. The first one being that the person must be a Guyanese and or a Commonwealth citizen who has been resident for over a year, and that residency itself is the other criterion that's essential for one to be registered. And the result of that is that only persons in that category will also be allowed to vote. So what's the relationship between voting and National Register of Registrants? The National Register of Registrants, which provides for persons from the age 14, is that database from which the voters list is extracted. And when the voter list is being extracted, all of the persons on that database, persons who obviously would have been registered, age 18 and above, are the ones who are extracted onto the voters list. Onto the voters list. And so the database, the National Register of Registrants, is where you get the voters list from, for all intents and purposes. So that registration in that regard cannot be a one-off exercise. It has to be an exercise that's done from time to time to provide for those who have come of age to be able to get onto that National Register of Registrants. So that when the voters list is extracted, persons who have come of age over time would also be on that voters list and be eligible to exercise their right as voters. So we have this voters list which is extracted from the National Register of Registrants.
And the first stage, they said, is the kind of preliminary.
Well, the voters list
is preliminary. A cycle, a process.
First of all, there is what you call the preliminary list of voters, which is extracted. That preliminary list of voters is then posted up, and people are allowed to make comments on that list, and it takes us through an exercise that is referred to as claims and objections. So that preliminary list is posted up, and people can then go and make a claim to be included on the list if they are not on, and they can make an objection to exclude people who should not be on the list. And in the main, people who should not be on the list are people who would have died, in the main. So that if one can produce a death certificate of someone who is on the list, then one can make an objection, there's a hearing, and that name of that dead person will be taken off of the list. Now, immediately this points to some of the problems that we have, because there is no absolute, perfect and comprehensive system for taking the names of the dead persons off of the list. Why do I say that? I say that for two reasons. One, in Guyana, for one's name to be submitted, to be taken off of the list, a death certificate has to be provided.
Mm-hmm.
A death certificate has to be provided.
This has to be provided by the person making the objection?
Making the objection.
I see.
As well as, there's an ongoing process where the General Registrar's Office would supply GCOM with the names of persons whose deaths have been registered. Now, the fact of the matter is that in that process, not every person who dies in Guyana has his or her name, his or her death registered. They get the required death certificate for the purpose of burial, but there's a further process of registration of that death with the General Registrar's Office. And very often, because people don't have any further transactions to do, like the management of estates and so, those deaths are not registered. And so those names never reach GCOM to be taken off of the list. So there are people there who would have died, but their names are still in the list. And there is the possibility that for claims and objections they can be taken off, but very often these names continue to be in the list. But I think more critical than that is that there are a number of Guyanese who are registered but are no longer a resident. They're no longer resident. Remember I said that residency is one of the
Residency
residency is one
is a requirement.
element, essential element. Now, of those people who would have registered and are no longer resident, among them are also people who would have died since having been registered. And that number could be in the thousands. There's absolutely no mechanism, absolutely none, at work to have the names of those persons who died overseas and were registered to be taken off the list. So what you would find happening is these names would continue to be in the National Register of Registrants and continue to be on the voters list. The consequence of that is that you have a voters list which will be bloated. A voters list which will not reflect the true number of Guyanese who are resident and alive.
I think I should.
So, the next point that one comes to is the question of residency.
Mhm.
Because those Guyanese who were registered and have migrated continue to be on the list. So you have two sets of people who are not resident, some because they have died,
Mhm.
and others because they're overseas, who are on the list, causing the list to be bloated. And therefore, no one can challenge the fact that there is the basis for us having the bloated list, because we do not take the dead persons overseas off the list simply because there's no mechanism to do so. Secondly, many instances the persons who are local and dead, their names are still in the list because they haven't registered the death. And thirdly, and this category seems to attract some controversy, people have migrated in large numbers and are still on the list. So that what we see is that with an estimated resident population of 750 persons,
I was just about to ask the same question.
that we're ending up with a voters list which in 2019 would have 630 persons. 630 persons. Now that is sufficient evidence for any intelligent and sensible person to know that our list has excess numbers in excess of the people who are resident.
Mhm.
Because we have a population of 750,000. We have a school population of around 200,000. Those are the people who are under the voting age. And when you minus 200,000 from 750,000, you come up with 500 and something thousand.
Mhm.
So how could you have a voters list of 600 and something thousand in that circumstance?
Mhm.
And that circumstance does not take into consideration that you also have people who are overseas
Who have migrated?
and migrated.
Mhm.
And so there is irrefutable evidence that our voters list is bloated. And no matter what anyone says, this is irrefutable. It is simple mathematics. A population of 750,000. A school population in the vicinity of 200,000. Minus that 200,000, 750,000, you come down to 500 something thousand. But we have a
But you
voters
currently
list
have a
of
list.
600
You talk.
something
This is about the
thousand.
list that expired in April.
Yes,
There's a list that expired in
Yes.
April
Yes.
of 2019.
Yes.
Has 600 plus.
600
and
plus.
obviously.
So,
Okay.
I mean, it has to be somebody who is either in a state of significant mathematical ignorance, literacy, or somebody who has some malicious and mischievous reason to come to the conclusion that our list is not bloated. It's beyond being naive. I mean, let's assume people said, all right, the list is not bloated, and now they have this information, and they continue to say so.
There is
One could only assume that they either do not understand. It's beyond their understanding. The simple subtractions I just did, or they have some mischief afoot, which can only be accommodated by the argument that the list is not good.
You know, I'm always intrigued that people use some very puerile pronouncement to create kind of contention. And I've listened to what you have said in relation to the numbers. Now, I heard a very puerile statement about people who are on holiday, students on vacation, and people who are on holiday not being able to be registered when this kind of cycle of registration is going on, and how the whole exercise is to deregister people. I don't quite understand that.
Well, national registration is provided for in the law. And the law says unequivocally that GCOM may engage in registration in a manner to be determined by GCOM. That's one. Secondly, I explained that the process is a two-phase process. There is the registration itself, and then there's a claims and objections period. If for a chance a person is overseas, who is resident, at the time of the registration, that person has every opportunity upon return during the claims and objections period to do a claim and to have his name or her name included on the list. And may I emphasize that this is nothing new. This is a process we've been going through for decades now. National registration and house-to-house registration is not new. And this nation at large, until recently, has embraced national registration without all of those red herrings that are now being shown up. And one has to ask the question, why those red herrings? We had national registration in 2008, and it was a consensual national registration. We had national registration, I think, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in 2001 process. It was consensual. We had national registration, and I'm talking house to house, to facilitate elections, the 1992 elections, and this was consensual. We had agreement in GCOM that we would from time to time, periodically, at least 7 years, have national registration, and it was consensual. We had the provision for national registration, house to house, provided for in the 2019 budget, and it was consensual. No one objected when that budget was being approved to house registration. And so one has to ask the question, why is it all of a sudden there's a hullabaloo about house-to-house registration? The hullabaloo is not just a matter of that there has to be registration in a short period of time because of the no confidence motion. People have gone as far now as to say that this thing is unconstitutional. You have political parties out there, more than one, I'm told some newcomers just joined them, saying it's unconstitutional, so we're challenging it. So it's not about, no longer a question of no confidence and having elections as quickly as possible. The focus now is on not having house to house for some reason which can only be, in my view, nefarious. Now,
No, I just there, Vincent, the no confidence motion, according to what I have read and have deduced from what the judges have said, that the decision on the 20th of June, not in the month of December, the CCJ ruling, that was the 18th of June, I think it was. The 18th of June.
Yes.
The 18th of June. Kicks in this Article 106, 6 and 106 and 7. Now, what I understand is that being said, the election body was not in shape because there were a number of factors that affected whatever may have been the case, inclusive of the court issue, the appeals and so on before they were held and so on, and there were things that were happening all the time. And as a result of this claim, they said that this expired lists from April. That is the main argument coming from the opposition, that they can use that list, and a statement. I haven't heard it from the chief election officer saying that, well, the list can be refreshed, and it seems as though all the media houses and persons in Guyana have been latching on to that to say this question of refresh and updated. I need some clarity in that area.
Well, some people may want to take that to be semantic. There's nothing semantic about it. Refresh simply means that you can use the expired list as a preliminary list of voters, do a claims and objections, and bring the list back to life for the purpose of an election. That's what refresh means. Refresh, therefore, does not address the question of the bloated list.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to get that.
Does not address the question of the bloated list. And so, yes, the CEO is technically quite correct that the list can be refreshed, meaning that it can be claims and objections. But you know, I do the analogy between the refresh and somebody who is having themselves refreshed rather than having a bath.
Yeah.
Cleansing the list requires a bath. It doesn't require refreshing.
A wet cloth and wipe down your
That's
skin.
superficial. That doesn't remove, So that, yes, the list can be refreshed. But the issue we are faced with, and the issue we are contending, is that because the list is bloated, it needs not simply to be refreshed, it needs to be cleansed, it needs to be sanitized. And this
So you can have credible
elections. And this desire to sanitize the list has nothing to do with the moment of no confidence. Because it had been predetermined that periodically we should sanitize the list. We have sanitized the list in the past by virtue of a new database, and we budgeted in 2018 for 2019 to be the year when we sanitize the list. So don't let's get confused that somebody is trying now to do this thing to delay. This thing was planned without any knowledge of an election to be held in 3 months. Now, there are some other arguments that the list should always be ready. And that is also relatively true. But let us look at the circumstances of the list always being ready. We generally have a system.
That's a very important.
We generally have a system where we know elections are held periodically, every 5 years. And so GCOM has the opportunity coming up to the 5-year period to be in a state of readiness, because there are things they could do which are not necessarily specific to the list itself, to put them in a state of readiness in anticipation of an election. Now, this election could not have been anticipated, so those things could not have been done. That's the first instance. Secondly, in the scheme of things, we were in fact supposed to have a cycle of continuous registration starting sometime in December to allow for the list to be refreshed.
In December of last year.
In December of last year.
Okay.
To allow, that exercise would have taken us from December to somewhere in April. So by the time we got to the expired list, we would have refreshed
The
the
list.
list, and therefore there would have been a list with a life for another 6 months. We had also planned that during the other 6 months, we would have started the house to house, so as to get the reloaded, the cleansed list that would have taken us to the elections in 2020. It so happened that the refreshment process did not take place because the chairman was ill, hospitalized, and could not sign the relevant order. That's the reason why that process did
Exercise,
not
okay.
take place. In law, that is called, I call it a force majeure. It is not a matter of GCOM's incompetence or anything of the sort. It's a matter that there were factors, elements beyond the control of GCOM that made it impossible for the exercise to be embarked upon when it was planned to be embarked upon. Having missed that opportunity because of factors beyond GCOM's control, GCOM decided that the better thing to do, having missed that opportunity at the time when it should have occurred, was to proceed to the next exercise, which had been planned anyhow for this year, and that was house-to-house registration. And so that is how house-to-house registration came onto the agenda. It was already voted for in terms of a budgetary vote by the National Assembly, and therefore GCOM would proceed to that, and in fact could not have proceeded to an election immediately, because even if there were a list, there was no allocation by the National Assembly for the conduct of an election. And what GCOM had to do was to make a requisition for a supplementary provision to the Parliament, which requisition was honored by the Parliament, even in the absence of the opposition. So the GCOM now has the funds to proceed with an election which was not budgeted for in this year. But one has to note that there's a difference between these claims and objections and even the continuous registration and house to house, which seeks to cleanse the list. And the intention was to cleanse the list. So all these arguments about you lose the list last year, you didn't complain, are being made against the background of a conscious intention in 2019 to cleanse the list, are being made against the background that in fact in 2017 monies were requested so the cleansing could happen in 2018. The monies were not granted. So don't blame GCOM for the fact that the list wasn't cleansed in 2018. GCOM did not get the resources in 2018. The Parliament did not vote the resources. But the intention was there for it to be cleansed then. The intention was there for it to be cleansed, in fact, in 2017. So GCOM hasn't woken up suddenly to want to cleanse the list. Now, so we, without anybody being able to argue the case, Guyana has a bloated voters list as a consequence of having a national register of registrants that does not have the mechanism to take off those people who have died overseas, and there are the thousands, and does not have the mechanism to take off many people who have died locally as well. And so you get that register throwing up a list that is bloated in as much as the register itself is bloated. And therefore the only mechanism that is immediately available to bring us up to date in terms of our residents is a house-to-house registration. In fact, there is another mechanism which at this time is not necessarily readily available, and that mechanism is provided for in Section 40 of the National Registration Act. Section 40 of the National Registration Act provides for a mechanism which can be used at the time of registration, for the Chief Immigration Officer to provide the Chief Elections Officer with a list of the persons who would have traveled overseas and not returned within a 3-month period. It also provides for the Chief Election Officer, in his or her own deliberate judgment, to take those names off of the voters list. The effect of that provision is no different from a house-to-house registration, which would not allow for those persons to be registered. The dead, particularly the dead overseas, and the non-resident Guyanese. It therefore means that our legal system envisaged that you should not have a voters list that is bloated because it made provisions, a provision which has not been activated and in the present time frame cannot be activated. Now, you made mention earlier to the Articles 106 and 107. Articles 106 and 107, in particular, envisaged that there may be circumstances in which GCOM
Article
may not be
in 106.6 and 106.7.
106.7
Yeah.
may not be ready in a 3-month period. So the law envisages that. And one would assume that the law expects that there would be reasonable people who would look at the circumstances, and in the circumstance, the parliament in the 2/3 majority would provide for an extension. So this is envisaged. It's not envisaged abstractly or hairy-fairy. It's envisaged because the law sees that there is that possibility. We have come upon that situation where we have embarked upon, we planned to embark upon, we need to embark upon household registration if we're going to have a list that can give us credible elections. And why do I stress the point of credible elections? There are people out there who argue that there are all sorts of mechanisms to ensure that there is no fraudulent voting. Oh, certainly there are mechanisms. There's the ink, one mechanism. There are scrutineers at the place of poll, another mechanism. And all of those things are indeed in place. But let me say this in the first instance, that the possibility of ensuring that there is no fraudulence is best served by a clean list. It's
Okay.
best served by a clean list.
All right. I want to say to our viewers that we will be taking some calls in another 5 minutes, but I am really intrigued, happy that Mr. Alexander is taking his time to make sure he explains these details, because I noticed the opposition and a few other new parties have been kind of contributing to the confusion out there in relation to this household registration.
Yes, Clayton. And I say it's best served by a clean list because the question of fraudulent elections, there are two major factors involved in fraudulent elections. One, a list that can facilitate fraud. Now, you are with the mechanisms to try to make sure to mitigate the
To prevent that.
But that that list is not clean, is the base for the possibility
To facilitate that.
to facilitate that. And that facilitation can be realized through the human factor. Human factor. Unfortunately in Guyana, we have evidence, even in the face of all of those mechanisms, of the human factor being at work. What do I mean by the human factor? I'm going to give an example now which is not related to the actual voting process. But when your chief elections officer concocts a result, it is not a reflection of the people's vote, that's a human factor's work.
Okay.
Now, if you can have the human factor to work at the level of your chief elections officer, who has taken an oath not to be fraudulent, what do you think can happen at the lower levels of the system? And it's no longer a question of what do you think can happen, it's a question of what has happened. GCOM has had to remove a presiding officer in the course of elections in 2011 because that presiding officer was facilitating substitute voting, was allowing people to vote for people who were dead. This is not a dream, this is not an imagination, this is what happened. If those dead people were not listed it could not happen. The perfect way to remove the human factor at the place of poll is to ensure that you have a list that does not allow the factor to be activated. You can't stuff the ballot box to make up numbers beyond what's on the list. You can stuff the ballot box to make up numbers if there are people on the list. And so one has to strive to create that ideal situation that negates the human factor, tampering with the ink, the human factor tampering with the box, the human factor facilitating, as happened in 2011. We also had situations in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, in the Chachomaga area, where there was significant substitute voting brought to the attention of the Chief Elections Officer, who took no action against the human factors at work. So let's be real. A house-to-house registration exercise is intended to remove that base, that foundation that can facilitate fraudulent elections, which fraudulent elections are pursued by the human factor, even in the face of the various mechanisms available to try to mitigate
and prevent that.
and to prevent it from happening. But we have the evidence that it has, in fact, occurred. And in fact, you still want to retain those mechanisms, but you want to use those mechanisms in the face of a list
That is blue.
that reduces. Because when you have an election where the difference between the parties is in the vicinity of one seat, 5,000 to 6,000 votes, that's the difference. And you have 200,000 votes to play around with to get the 5,000, to get the 10,000.
The opportunity.
Then you're creating, the probability is high. You need to manipulate 5,000 against 200,000 in approximately 3,000 polling stations. You just need to sneak to a station on the average. But when you take the demography of our country and the way in which polling stations are located in enclaves, enclaves where people in the 90% vote for one party as opposed to the other, you have a recipe there for the attempts at fraud. And so those people out there who do not understand, get it real. Any voting where 200,000 are out there with a result that the gap is 5,000, you're playing with trouble to entertain a voters list with that 200,000 that could be manipulated
Let me see if I take our first call.
in approximately 3,000 polling stations.
Yeah, I missed that call. Anyway, yes.
So let's get it real.
That's very
So
interesting.
that
what
the
you
issue here is not only the issue now of a timely election because of the no confidence, it's also a credible election because of the list. And no past event is a justification for present negligence. So even if you tell me, well, you didn't complain last year, well, you're complaining now. And you're complaining real. And that reality has to be taken into consideration.
Morning, on the air.
Hello?
Morning, sir.
Yeah, morning. I'm calling concerning no confidence vote.
Yes, sir.
Be a business in Guyana, you know.
What's that?
After the next election, there could be a no confidence vote in the next 3 months. Once you get 1 seat or 2 seats, and you get the money to pay, and you pay 2 man or 3 man, you'll get no confidence vote. Right? So it would be one of the biggest businesses in Guyana. So people only talking about this no confidence vote. They might get a no confidence vote after 3 months after the election too. Once you get money to pay, everything is going to leak. So I think this whole country looks like it in a whole uproar.
You're there in a limbo.
Yes. And I think that the government should bring on the army for this election. That if they don't bring out the army, they will get certain group of people will overpower certain people. So they have to bring out the army. If they bring out the army, they do. All right, God bless you.
All right, I take your note. Thanks for calling.
It is a matter of concern as to whether how the Constitution provides for no confidence is the best mechanism. That's a matter of concern. A matter which I think ought to be discussed in the context of constitutional
Of the
reform.
constitutional change and so on to kind of
Today-
prevent.
today we are, that motion has occurred. It's a fact of life. And we're dealing with how could we best get an election that does not provide for fraudulence.
Morning, on here.
Good morning, how are you?
Morning, sir.
Well, this is a program, and I think that they need to do the voters this again, because I know some person, right now you can tell a name of a person who died in the last election, and that on the 2015 list, she was on that list. I don't want to give the person because
No, it's okay. You don't have to give the name.
me, and I can tell you that the list need to clean up. As what Mr. Alexander said, it's very true. It's basis on that because a lot of people, not to be honest, to say, look, my grandfather did or my grandmother did, and she name's still on the list because they know what's going on. So you need to do that, and that's a very good idea that they get both sides need a good list, and let it play to level.
Yeah, because Mr. Alexander is saying the mechanism that's provided for is the household registration to
Can
get.
if I can to call that person that died in 2014.
No, I don't want you to call any names.
When it is, and she is there, and when she, the mother, her daughter checked the list the last election, he was there in that on the list. I told her, but the next time when the registration come around, and the plain objection period, go and object to it that the name is on the list because she could be artist Sundar, she did, but somebody else can actually the same name and I can use that as a character vote.
Okay.
And a practice, and no one asks the next question. If someone is going on a holiday, and they came coming back in a short time, and the voters and the registration and can the family told them I'm out of stock and I come back and say, how can I get that registration number?
Well, I think it's a good question because I have my niece that is on holiday right now, and she has gone into Canada, but she's coming back in say 4 or 5 weeks time.
No, that one to ask because.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Alexander will address that
There are
question.
two things
All right.
about
That's
that.
me opening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but
There are two
thanks for
things
calling.
about people who are on holiday. The registration period, I think it's a 3-month period. Therefore, once someone returns during the registration period, even if the house was previously visited, the GCOM office can be advised and requested that the person be visited and registered. So that in that sense, the person will not be excluded. Secondly, when this registration is done and the preliminary list is posted, there will be another exercise of claims and objections, during which period someone who would have returned from overseas can do a claim and be included on the list.
Morning, John here. I missed that one. Yeah, anyway. Yes. Yeah, because that particular question that was asked is a question that I would have asked at the end because I have a niece and her husband is out of the country
The
right
fact
now.
of the matter is that registration spans a period that is normally longer than a vacation period. So the
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Since you started, I didn't know confidence motion. Just tell us what's on there. Even the government together, disrespecting the constitution from the beginning. Yes? From the beginning, the CCJ rule that the election was given 3 months. Mr. Lowen Field said at the court, what the whole guy needs here in the whole world.
Yes.
You have to clean this, the whole election, and just big man up on TV. Yes? Misleading. Yes, young people. Shame him.
tell me what I've said just
What
now
is
that
it that
you
is
could
missing?
prove wrong. Tell me what I've said just now today that you can prove wrong. I have given facts. We don't sit here for people to come and make statements at our expense that can't prove anything. I am giving facts. What are the facts that this man who called in
Can produce.
who has been given the privilege to call in at the expense of the Bonham Foundation, what facts has he presented?
Well, the Bonham Foundation is always kind of promote kind of public education. That's one of the hallmark of.
But not
Forest
public
Foundation.
mischief.
Not public mischief. And obviously the caller trying to create some mischief in the absence of any detail in relation to the claim he's making. Morning, you're on the air.
I would like them to call on a phone that
Morning.
has a picture so I can take them to court for
Morning, sir.
declaration of corrupt.
Yes, good morning.
Yeah.
The solution to the no confidence vote is to have, as soon as that vote is made,
Mm.
just know when it's going to be heard, right?
Mm.
But you must have a confidence vote
Mm.
before that vote is heard. You must apply for a confidence vote.
Mm.
So after the no confidence vote, then whether it's a week after, 2 weeks after, but to make sure you file before that vote is heard.
Yes, I'm hearing you.
So you now will have the chance to replace those corrupt people, and that will have to be heard, because as long as filed, it got to be heard.
Mm.
And it's in sequence of the same no confidence vote. And the Constitution just the confidence.
That's an interesting scenario you have just proffered. There's an interesting scenario. I want to hear Mr. Alexander's views on what you have just said.
Okay.
Thank you for calling. Yeah.
I have not exercised my mind on that technical approach to the matter. What I am dealing with today is the fact that there has been a no confidence vote.
Mm.
We know what the result of that is and what the court has said about that, and so we have to live with that.
Mm.
I am dealing with the fact of how do we get a credible election in the face of a vote or without no vote? How do we get a credible election? And the role of house-to-house registration in ensuring that there is a credible election.
Morning, you're on the air.
Hi, good morning, sir.
Yeah, morning, sir.
First of all, I can barely switch a number. I just guessed another number.
We can barely see the number?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
22351, 9 I guess the other number.
5192.
Well, we're seeing it very
I-
clear. We're seeing- Anyway, we should repeat the number for those out there. 223-5192. 223-5192.
Yes, sir, you can go ahead.
I'm moving away from the election
Mm-hmm.
topic a little. What I'm concerned about is that for too long we've been hearing about the powers of the president, and each party goes into power.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing has been done, even though we know that we have to get a two-thirds majority.
Mm-hmm. Are you true? Hello? I've lost the caller. Yeah, he wasn't finished making his point, but
The most I would say to that caller, didn't make a complete point.
mm,
But the most I would say to the caller is that there is the accepted fact that we never completed the constitutional reform process. And that there has been call for either even further reform. But the fact is that after the process, it was agreed that we would reconvene to do a number of things which
That were
are
not
in the
done.
recommendations.
okay.
Which are in the recommendations. And at the political level, the will has never been manifest to resume the process.
Morning, sir, you're on the air.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
First of all, much good morning to you, John.
Good morning.
The thing is bothering me concerning, there was something in the air a few months ago pertaining to a $1 million plea to the company that tampered with the American election to the opposition. Could you shine some light on that, whereas pertaining to our election?
Let me see if I get you clear. You were saying that some months ago or weeks ago you saw somewhere
In the air,
$30 million paid to some organization in the United States.
and the same company that said was hard handling in the American previous election.
American election, yeah. I read some.
I think what you're referring to is a lobby firm from the United States which has been retained by the PPP to work for them. We're not quite sure what kind of work they're doing, But there are reports that the nature of the work they do is not necessarily all above board. There are reports of that sort. But we know that the PPP has retained such a firm, and they're paying them large sums of money to be a part of their machinery for the elections.
All right, thanks for calling. Yeah, all these various. Morning, you're on the air. Morning.
Good morning.
Mhm.
Morning.
Certainly, Guyanese forget the past. And we need to go back to the past so that we can know exactly what your life is.
Speak a little louder, please.
You know, Guyanese know about Constitution, right? And the opposition telling people about violating Constitution and democracy. But the biggest violators of our Constitution was Mrs. Janet Devan and King. When the court order was issued to our security, yeah, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Guyanese forget that. Other than that, we need to get a new voter list. No matter what, I want our president to know that we have people who vote for him and should not overpower and go to any election without a new voter list. Because that is the only way we can get a credible election.
Okay, that's exactly what Mr. Alexander was explaining to the nation at large.
All Guyanese can be satisfied to know that they're registered. Not somebody who died because I heard, these people had get the old voters list and they were going around all over in those regions and they were taking off who were alive and who died, who went away and all, and they even go far as getting the ID card. So it is an attempt to rig an election.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Are you talking, who are these people? You're talking people from the opposition?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I have a friend who was telling me that he gave me some number.
Mhm.
He said that I want to make Mr. Alexander conscience, like if somebody, if they can tamper with your database and make you vote even though you did not vote. They tamper with the database, I mean, they get your ID number, they get your name.
Mm-hmm.
So because the other day I heard a call coming from my phone, and when I answered the phone, is a company from still in Washington. I don't know those persons.
A person from telling where?
A company from still in Washington,
Ah.
right? So I wanted to know if these people calling you get your name, and if they're calling you to know that if you're alive and all of these things. So I don't know if it's really happening.
Mm-hmm.
I just put down the phone because I don't know the number.
Mm-hmm.
I heard especially calling from Washington. I told my wife that, so I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Oh, we got to be very careful with these things. Thanks for calling.
Our voting is manual, so I don't think there could be electronic manipulation of your vote. The voting is manual, but certainly if you do not turn up to vote, that leaves the possibility of somebody trying to cast a vote for you.
Morning, you're on the air.
Yes, morning again.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said,
But you're very lucky. You're getting through very easily.
yeah, why I said that is because right now, and even before they reached the CCG, and while they were the CCG, the PPP was just a 32-seat parliament. They were not the majority. They were only the majority for the afternoon, maybe half an hour from the vote to the closing of parliament. The next day, the vote flew out the country.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have that vote no more because he had to leave parliament, even though they did it without notifying the speaker
Mm-hmm.
or the party. So it's a stick vote, right? So the next day, his seat wasn't valid anymore. So PPP was back to 32. All the time they're talking till now, they're only 32 seats. They're not a majority. They don't have the confidence in the people. It's just a game that the CCJ didn't understand that a seat value 5,000 votes thereabout. So one man who was 5,000 votes for half an hour wasn't the 5,000 votes the next day.
All right, thanks for calling. Thanks for calling.
So I just want to say that.
Yeah, good, thanks.
And
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
I get the drift. You're talking about what may be referred to as a momentarily no confidence. It is not a absolute and constant and permanent and no confidence. Momentarily. No confidence for the vote. It was confidence before, and because of the gentleman's behavior, became confidence after. But for that moment, that's an interesting perspective. I would respond to that differently by saying my own disposition is that the way the laws of Guyana have evolved, it was never intended that there could be that kind of no confidence where somebody from the same list brought down his or her list. I don't think that the law was intended to operate that way. And it's a matter in which probably on another occasion I would deal with more comprehensively.
All right, morning, on there. This might be my last call before I do some wrapping up. Time is running away.
I wanted to say something.
Yes, please.
Was the other way around for this election. After that, I'm going to ponder how it look chaos in the country. But it's less too quiet. That's all I have to say.
Well, we're glad it's not the other way around.
I'm glad that it's not the other way
We want
around.
to
Mike.
preserve our Georgetown.
And preserve some sanity amongst our
That
people.
doesn't solve our problem.
Anyway, thanks for calling. I just want to tell our viewers that the foundation is geared towards providing you with public education on crucial issues. Today we have been dealing with the no confidence motion and house-to-house registration. I want to encourage persons out there, get yourself registered. It's your right. Make sure you get yourself registered, because very soon we don't have the date. Elections will be held. Now, I might be able to take one more call before I ask Mr. Alexander to do the wrap-up. Morning, you're on the air.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking this call.
Yes.
Disconnected on the topic of the presidents above the law.
Yes, yes. Let me hear you.
Yes, we would like, I think the public should be educated about this thing.
Yes.
And we have an opportunity now
Mm-hmm.
to do that referendum voting about the president above the law in this election after educating the public.
Mm-hmm.
This oil is bringing up the spoil.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody need a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taxpayers' money going to waste. Nobody is comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have this. We need to protect taxpayers' money.
I agree with you fully. Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks for
you.
calling. And yeah, Mr. Alexander, you were right on target today. You were very explicit in relation to the variables and processes that have to be undertaken by GCOM and as well as the voters out there, so that we can have credible elections that will be satisfactory to all of Guyana, not just one party or one group of people. Now, you have established in terms of numbers what the electoral list, the population is 750,000, but here's a case where we have a voter list of 600,000 plus 630, there about 640. Common sense will tell you that something is wrong there. And you quite rightly explain the only way that can be corrected, and this whole concept that is being provided out there about lists being refreshed doesn't fix it. Your last words before we
My
close.
last words will simply be this. The issue before us is one of sanitizing our voters list. Sanitizing our voters list. We have available a mechanism called House to House to do so. In the absence of any other mechanism, that's what we have to do. If anybody has another mechanism for sanitizing, let's talk about it. But what is critical here is that we sanitize the voters list. We need to have a list that does not allow for the human factor to intervene and create fraud during the course of our elections. The cry has to be for us not to refresh, refreshing doesn't solve the problem. The cry is for us to sanitize. Low and feel is technically right. The list can be refreshed. But refreshing is not addressing our problem. Our problem is how do we sanitize the list. The process of house-to-house registration provides the known opportunity to sanitize our list. Let's get on with the business of sanitizing our list.
Yeah, once again, I want to thank you all for being with me today on this program, State of the Nation. I've been your host. Today we have discussed household registration and other factors in relation to the upcoming elections. We have our chairman, and I want to say thank you until the 4th Sunday in August when I bring to you another program of the State of the Nation.
Probably we should wish all of the viewers there a happy emancipation.
Oh yes,
as we go into emancipation in the course of this week. A sanitized list, being able to have a true, credible election could be considered a continuation of the process of emancipation. Happy emancipation.
Yeah. Okay, thanks you all for being with me today until the 4th Sunday.